In case you've been living under a rock, the highest rated anime of all time according to most user review websites is a relatively recent show called Sousou no Frieren. Overall, it's a pretty solid show that has some pretty meaningful things to say about the value of human connection. However, I have some gripes with the show that I feel have been overlooked by the anime community at large, concerns which no other content creator has seen fit to give voice to. To best illustrate these concerns, we'll be examining episode 16, which centers around an old dwarf named Vol and the promise he made to his long-deceased wife. This is the worst episode of Sousou no Frieren. Before that, a quick summary of the premise behind the show for people who haven't seen it. Sousou no Frieren is a simple twist on a classic formula, a party of adventurers saving a fantasy world from a demon king. In this show, however, the story starts after the end of their journey. Our protagonist, Frieren, is an incredibly long-lived elf who is predisposed to solitude, and struggles with forming meaningful connections with other people. Some 50 years after her party that saved the world disbanded, she attends the funeral of one of its members. Here, Frieren realizes that she regrets not getting to know her party members better, and so 24 years later, she sets off on a journey with a new party of young adventurers in order to reach Ariole, a distant land where the living can purportedly speak with the dead. Some time passes on her journey, and then we finally reach the episode in question. Right away, episode 16 fumbles its themes a bit. You see, the previous episode had been entirely about the value of having trust in other people. The whole party had been put to sleep by a curse, leaving the newest member, Sign, alone against a powerful monster. Despite his best efforts, he's unable to damage the monster, forcing him to rely on the one thing he can do: utilize a spell to wake one of his party members for a mere 5 seconds. Earlier, Frieren had confidently stated before falling asleep that 5 seconds would be sufficient for her to defeat the monster on her own, but Sign wavers. Eventually, he gets a flashback where he remembers a lecture he received on the value of trust, and he decides to put his faith in Frieren and wakes her. Of course, she defeats the monster as promised. Thus concludes a nice little tale about the value of trusting your companions, even in cases where you don't fully understand them. So, imagine my shock when the literal very next episode opens with this scene. Our party is coming up to a village, and Frieren tells her companions stories about a trusted friend of hers that lives there, an older dwarf named Vol. So, what's the very first thing Vol does?
Huh? 戦闘での死因の多くは油断だ。
He sucker punches the party's warrior, Stark, injuring him to the point of being unable to walk. Vol then goes on a rant about how trust is a weakness, and that true warriors never let their guards down even among friends. For some reason, this is accepted by the party as being some kind of profound wisdom, and Vol is forgiven for his brazen, unprovoked assault. We then learn the backstory of Vol. He's lived for 400 years, far longer than the average life expectancy of dwarves in this setting, and he spent all that time guarding this village. He's a total hermit, having no real friends and never engaging with the community he's sworn his life to. We're told that Vol hardly ever speaks to anyone, to the point where the people of the village have forgotten why he even stands guard over them in the first place. His motive for doing this, as it turns out, is a promise he made to his human wife, who passed away hundreds of years ago. Even though he can no longer even remember her face, he lives his life in service to the promise he made to her. Now, I don't think it's particularly outlandish for me to take a look at this scenario and question if Vol is, perhaps, completely wasting his life. The problem here isn't his dedication to defending the village, but his decision to isolate himself from the people living in it. Being totally alone for hundreds of years has to be completely miserable. And given that this is a show that's supposedly about the value of connecting with other people, I'd expect the author to understand this. Surely, the reason that Vol's wife asked him to guard the village is because she loved the village and the people who live there. Assuming this is the case, then while Vol has remembered the contents of the promise he made, his isolation reveals that he has forgotten the true reasons behind it. We'd have the setup for a good story. Thus, there's an obvious direction that this episode is practically begging to go in. First, through some circumstances, Vol would be forced out of his solitude. Perhaps one of Frieren's party members takes pity on Vol and decides to coax him out of his shell, inviting him to a local festival that's happening soon. Vol tries to refuse, but they're persistent, and eventually he relents and decides to attend the event. At some point during the festivities, Vol realizes that he's starting to enjoy himself. Eventually, the combination of sounds of joy, the smell of food, and the jovial atmosphere triggers a flashback for him. He remembers having been to that same festival hundreds of years ago with his wife. He didn't always isolate himself like he does now. He used to love the village and its community. At the end of the episode, he reaffirms his intent to live the remainder of his days as the protector of the village, not just because his wife cared about the village, but because he cares about the village. This idea for an episode is a little cliche, but Sousou no Frieren has never been a show that's overly concerned with being original. However, in the actual episode, events unfold very differently. In this episode, Vol is never challenged regarding his decision to live his life in complete solitude. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that his lifestyle is depicted as admirable. At one point in the episode, as Vol is reminiscing with Frieren, we get a flashback to some 80 years ago, when Frieren's previous party visited the village. Vol expresses to this party his doubts about the way he's chosen to live his life.
わしは遠い昔に交わした約束を果たしているに過ぎん。滑稽な話だろう。わしはずっと死者との約束を守っている。
The leader of Frieren's party, Himmel the hero, takes offense at Vol doubting the nobility of his lifestyle. He affirms that Vol is doing the right thing and that he's living the way his wife would have wanted. Back in the present, as Vol reflects on this moment, his resolve to continue living his life in solitude is reaffirmed. In case it wasn't clear enough that the author believes that this is the correct mindset, Vol reveals on the following day that he dreamt of his wife's face for the first time in decades that very night. Vol chose to live in the past rather than the present, and he was rewarded for it. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this episode is firmly at odds with the idea that Sousou no Frieren is a show about valuing human connection. However, I may have fibbed a bit when I implied earlier that this episode is alone in this regard. In reality, the Vol episode is a microcosm for the problems that permeate every single aspect of the writing in this anime. Remember that scene when Himmel the hero affirmed Vol's lifestyle? This actually wasn't out of character at all for Himmel. In fact, Himmel's life has a significant number of disturbing parallels to Vol's. After the party that Himmel journeyed with for 10 years in order to save the world disbanded, what did he actually do with his life? In the anime, it seems as though he didn't do much, if anything. When he meets back up with his former party members 50 years later, we get numerous scenes of them reminiscing about the past, but no scenes of them catching each other up on their exploits over the 50 years they spent separated. There's no concrete evidence that Himmel ever went on any more adventures, formed any new friendships, picked up any new hobbies, or did much of anything in that 50-year span. There is one thing we do know that he did, however. He lamented his inability to court Frieren. As it turns out, he had fallen in love with her on their adventure, but had never been able to fully express this. Thus, he stewed in regret and lived in isolation after their party disbanded, accomplishing nothing new until the day he died. Much like Vol, Himmel never moved on. In fact, nobody in the show ever moves on. In episode 15, the party runs into a nobleman named Orden. His son recently died in battle, and in order to conceal this fact and keep morale among his men high, he contracts a member of Frieren's party to impersonate his dead son at an upcoming ball. This is a deeply uncomfortable premise, and raises numerous ethical and philosophical questions. However, the show is utterly uninterested in exploring them. Stark, who is assigned the role of impersonating Orden's son, never once expresses doubt over the deceitful nature of this quest, nor the weird psychological hang-up that Orden seems to have when it comes to denying his own son's death. Instead, this episode wastes its runtime with multiple repetitive scenes of Stark complaining about the annoyance of being forced to learn nobleman etiquette. Orden's not the only father in the show whose life is haunted by the memory of his deceased son. Several episodes prior, we met another nobleman by the name of Granat, whose own son was also slain in battle by demons. Rather than deny his son's death, Granat has chosen to dedicate himself to revenge. While this is a reasonable goal given that demons in this setting are pure evil by nature, it's just another example of a long line of characters in this show having their entire life's purpose laid out for them by their deceased loved ones. Virtually every character in Sousou no Frieren is haunted by the ghosts of the relationships they've lost. Just as Vol dedicates himself to his dead wife and Orden and Granat dedicate themselves to their dead sons, every member of Frieren's party set out on their journey because of a relationship they've lost. Frieren regrets not getting to know her previous party members better, and so she's venturing to a realm that allows her to commune with the dead. Fern follows Frieren because she wishes to live up to the expectations of Hyder, the man who raised her. Stark follows Frieren because he feels guilt over not having been a strong enough warrior to fight alongside his deceased brother and father. Even Sign, who joins the party for a few episodes before departing, only goes adventuring in order to search for a childhood friend of his that he regrets parting ways with. All of these characters have had their main goal in life thrust upon them by someone else, rather than it being something that they chose for themselves. This extends further than just their primary objectives, however. Every single detour and side quest that our characters set out on in this show is something that was thrust upon them, never something that they chose for themselves. There are no subplots in Sousou no Frieren where the inciting incident comes from a choice made by one of the party members. All of them are mere passengers in the story that react to the things that happen around them, as opposed to being in the driver's seat and creating the action themselves. Everything the party does happens only because the responsibility to act was thrust upon them. They witness some grave threat to human life, they run out of money, or they encounter some sort of roadblock, and then the story develops from there. For once, I'd like to see an episode where the plot is driven by the desires of the characters, rather than the circumstances they find themselves in. As it stands, there's not a single moment in the first season of the show where Fern or Stark makes a meaningful decision. Furthermore, the characters aren't just passive in the way they approach their journey, they're also passive in the way they engage in forming connections with other people. All of their friends and loved ones are people who they only initially bonded with because they are forced to spend time around each other through circumstance. In the worldview of Sousou no Frieren, a relationship isn't something that someone goes out of their way to form, but is instead something which is thrust upon them through chance. Characters don't choose to become friends with other people, can't choose to become friends with other people. All they can do is wait around until the natural flow of their life delivers a friendship to them. This is the reason that the author of Sousou no Frieren feels the need to write so much about the importance of cherishing the connections people form with each other. If people have no agency over forming relationships, then every relationship is truly irreplaceable. If you lose a friend, you can't ever count on making a new one. If you lose a spouse, the idea of remarrying is unthinkable. This is not only a bad message, it's a deeply harmful one. The modern world is facing an unprecedented loneliness epidemic due to the advent of the internet, exacerbated by the lockdowns from the COVID-19 pandemic. Birth rates are way down, virginity rates are skyrocketing, and polls reveal that more and more people say that they have no close friends at all. This is the world that chose to elevate an anime like Sousou no Frieren to the #1 rated spot of all time on user review aggregators, an anime which tells people that there's nothing they can do to solve their loneliness. Please, if you are a lonely person and you enjoyed Sousou no Frieren, I want you to take a moment to reflect on the way that you view human connections. You don't have to wait around for friends to appear, you can take an active role in forming friendships for yourself. Go to in-person conventions, join an online community, do something to make a change in your life. Maybe you could even watch an original anime for once, instead of the 100th power fantasy in a JRPG fantasy setting. There are plenty of anime which are truly about the importance of valuing human connections, about getting out there and making friends instead of waiting for friends to come to you. March Comes In Like a Lion, Barakamon, Tatami Galaxy, these are phenomenal anime that are all more deserving of being celebrated than Sousou no Frieren. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. I know this is a pretty big departure from the usual videos I post on this channel, but it actually gnawed at me how I've never seen any other content creators make this, frankly, obvious observation about Sousou no Frieren. As an all-around genius, my wisdom is practically boundless, and my insights into anime are numerous and profound, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more. That's all for now, Herson signing out.
What the fuck is this cog damage?